You, your community involvement is very impressive. You just described many of the things that you've been involved in. You've got a Facebook page called The Resolution, which advocates a number of things. Tell me in a nutshell what that is and what you want to accomplish now.
In a nutshell, we're addressing systemic racism. And we're starting off with police reform. We believe that the systems in place and the agencies in place that control or have a play a role in our daily lives, they need to be addressed in a way that we acknowledge that it hasn't been favorable to, or not just favorable, it hasn't been equitable, I would say, for people of color. And so thinking about police reform, I'm the type of person that looks at, like I said, I'm a historian, so I look at the origin of things. I believe that's important. And so when looking at the origin of policing, a lot of it comes from slave patrol. And so what we need to do, I believe, in the resolution, we're trying to just tackle the fact that there are some historical issues there, and we want to get to a point where everyone in the community has a trust relationship with those officers, and we feel included. And not only that, that there's some form of civilian inclusion in any kind of investigative matters that include complaints, loss of life, and just behavior that may be over the top when dealing with the community.
Something that I think members of the white community are trying to wrap their minds around in some cases is they don't understand, because you're talking about your experiences and the community experiences. If you're in my shoes, for example, the experiences that you have navigating society day to day can be very different than in our cases, a white male, African-American male, can be very different experiences. When you talk about the things that you have experienced, whether it's interactions with police officers or things at your places of employment, what are some of those things that you're talking about to make it clear for people who may not understand?
I'll put it like this, and this may not answer your question directly, but I think it helps. When you look at the systemic problems of racism in our country, I believe we need to look at how we educate first and foremost. And so if you look at our educational system here, white America is not taught about Black America at a level that would encourage inclusiveness and understanding, truly, I believe. And so the example, I'm a historian, so history. You start school in about August, right? And then you start learning about the Revolutionary War, and then you hit on slavery a little bit, and then we rush through Reconstruction, and then we go into a little bit about Jim Crow, and we talk about the Wright brothers and the Ford inventing the car, and then we go into Great Depression, and then we go into the Civil Rights Movement. Right before we get there, Black History Month comes up. And so now we go backwards to go into slavery a little bit. We go into some of our plight in the post-slavery time, and then some Jim Crow, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X paragraph, and then President Obama, excuse me. And so Black America is more than that. We're more than our plight, and we're more than we also have additions to this country. And so for someone like yourself, not learning about some of the additions and Black Americans actually at an equitable and equal level, a lot of our plight can go over your head, because you wouldn't learn about how the 13th Amendment, although it that's what ended slavery. There's a clause in there that included criminal. So you can still be a slave, quote unquote, if you're a criminal. Fast forward to 2020, how are Black classified? And people of color, thug, criminal, felon. And so I'll ask you, in that regard, has slavery ever ended? That's a question that is legit, I would think. And then you can fast forward into white flight, Great Migration, and how the suburbs were actually created. Suburbs were created because Blacks and people of color moved into the cities, and at that time, white America didn't want to live among us, and so it moved to the suburbs. And then legislation introduces redlining, which affects housing and schools, and so if we were educated on that, actually, and not in a way that is intended to demean our country, but in a way that we would stop putting band-aids on racial inequality, because what we've been doing, in my opinion, is putting a lot of band-aids on our issues because we haven't addressed them. And I think that addressing that will be better done in our educational process, because then I believe once you start educating the proper way about, because you can't tell the American story without telling the Black American story and vice versa. So once you start doing that, I believe we'll begin to see not just police officers, but bankers, people who give loans, educators. You can go down the line. Every agency in America, I believe, we would see becoming more understanding and responsive to inequalities and actually be able to address them.
Two of those points that you just brought up, I think, are interesting because I think they are interrelated. The fact that a lot of times white Americans are not exposed in a way that they should be to Black history. And at the same time, through the decades, they have in many cases been separated in various ways, whether it's by way of education or by way of employment, redlining, as you talked about. So that separation, I think, can serve to enable the ignorance and the lack of sensitivity toward that. Talking about history, something else that has been in the news quite a bit here in the last week or so, as you and I are having this conversation now, has been the debate on these monuments around the country, especially in the southern part of the country, that are, whether it's to Nathan Bedford Forrest or Robert E. Lee, the removal of these statues. And I think that goes to what you're talking about. You know, for some people who may not understand the importance of that, it sounds like what you're saying, that sort of speaks to the education and really the lack of exposing the community at large to the reality of history.
Definitely. And you talk about the monuments, for example. A lot of those people in those generals and the Confederate side at that time owned slaves. And we all know what American slavery is. American slavery is different than any form of slavery prior to it. American slavery is the first form of slavery to dehumanize the slaves, which we can educate on. But my point in saying that is those slave owners, that's what they were. And so would we want statues of someone, or would you want a statue of someone who kidnapped your children to be sitting around years and years and years? And so that's just a example of kind of the ignorance and we don't think about that. And so these people are being recognized and revered for something that we should be trying to not remove ourselves from, acknowledge as a country, but be better than.